We need to talk about what's happening in Georgia, because right now it feels like Georgian democracy is bleeding out on the sidewalk, and it feels like as of right now, the momentum is nothing is going to happen. I don't know where the momentum's going to go. I don't know where the protesters are going to take it. I know the president of Moldova has released a statement saying that the Russians interfere and stole the election. The president of Moldova has already said that. I know that tons of European and Western politicians have come out in condemnation. I know that a lot of countries are not coming out to recognize the results. I know Canada has it. I know Germany has it, I believe. I know Italy hasn't. Like, there's so many countries that haven't, and the only ones that have has been Viktor Orban's Hungary and I believe the Russians. So, you know, not two nations who have the best track record when it comes to electoral integrity or the respect of civic institutions, or just, you know, let's just say the concept of democracy. So what's going on in Georgia? Why are protesters saying the vote was rigged? Why are people out in the street? Why is the president of Moldova, the president of the country, saying that the Russians stole the election? Well, let's go get into it. So in Georgia, I said Moldova for a second, sorry. Moldova also had an election, and there's also questions about whether the Russians interfered there in the buying of over 300,000 votes at the upper echelons, according to the Moldovan government. So, sorry, I'm getting my Russian interference in domestic politics and elections confused with the other one. So in Georgia, there is a ruling political party called the Dream Party. And when it comes to the Dream Party, there is no other party that is close to the amount of seats they have. They have a majority in the parliament, and every other opposition party is like at 10, 16, 20%, something along those lines. And so the biggest problem the opposition has been like collecting around a single force. And so the Dream Party, which you could say is pretty conservative, it is a party that does not want any confrontation with Russia, says that confrontation with Russia over, Georgian territory that was taken during the 2008 war, it's kind of fruitless. We don't want war. We don't want war. We don't want war. But this has led, this pathway or this logic has led the Georgian Dream Party to not only say we don't want war, but some would even say to serve Russia's interests. And not only to serve Russia's interests, but to be very callous in how it treats the Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. One example would be during this campaign, as the opposition was attacking the government for its weakness on the issue of Ukraine, when the vast majority of Georgians support Ukraine, the Georgian government, the Dream Party, came out with political ads showing cities in Ukraine burnt to the ground and then peaceful Georgian cities. And the point was, if the opposition wins, this is what's going to happen to us. We are the peace people, and against us is these people who want war, who want confrontation with the Russians. They're begging for, a fight. Where the opposition would say they don't really want a war, but they don't like the foreign agents law, which the Georgian government instituted to make it so they could monitor foreign NGOs and press organizations and such much closer if they get more than 20% of their funding from outside sources, which, I mean, when you're talking about an organization like Amnesty International or Doctors Without Borders, that's going to be the vast majority of these NGOs. And not only does it give them more rights to monitor them, it puts them on a list called the Foreign Agents List. And many of these so-called foreign agents were also attacked violently by what we would call from Ukraine Tatushki, which were basically hired thugs that go up and do political violence. And there's been a lot of accusations of the Georgian Dream Party hiring Tatushki, or at least the Georgian version of Tatushki, and sending them out against their opposition as well. And that is something that has brought comparisons to the Russian government. In fact, the foreign agents law is referred to as the Russian law because of its similarities to legislation passed in Russia that led the pathway to more authoritarian controls down the line, because once you identify someone as a foreign agent, then it's not as hard to go after them. It's not as hard to socially isolate them, to try to criminalize them, or try to crush them. Now, this isn't the only, I don't know how far I really want to get into Georgian Dream Party's domestic politics, but another thing that I would throw out there, and this is definitely substantial for this election, the Georgian Dream Party says they're pro-joining the European Union. But when they passed the Russian agents law, the European Union was very clear that if they were to pass this law, that it would be against what they refer to as European values, and therefore they wouldn't allow Georgia into the European Union.
Caught your live. Thank you for discussing Georgian nightmare.
Hey, thank you so much for the 50. My goodness, Makuma. Sorry, I'm look. I care deeply about what's going on in Georgia. I will butcher Georgian names. Okay, just give me the Georgian food. Okay, and I will appropriate it. I will take it like Americans do with all the food. We will absorb it. We will grind it up. We will consume it. And then give me like a Steve version of your Georgian name, okay? The true American way of whitewashing the culture to be more consumable. I want to consume. I'm a consumer at heart. Mamuka. Okay, thank you. I tried my best. Thank you for the 50. So the Georgian Dream Party says they want to join the European Union. European Union says you pass this law, you can't join. We're going to suspend it. They pass it anyway. And so they suspend their accession. So Georgia currently, it was going through the accession process before, and it was trying to. Now that's already been suspended. So the European Union has already said, until you get rid of this law, you are not going to join the European Union. The Dream Party responded by saying, yes, we will. They just say that eventually they're going to get around to joining the European Union. And then on this campaign, they've openly said that they're going to ban opposition parties, many of them pro-EU opposition parties that are campaigning against them and are part of the coalition campaigning against the Dream Party. They're going to ban them. Just goodbye. You can't do that anymore if they win. They said this openly on the campaign trail. I'm not like, oh, this is like a secret meeting. I'm on a stage. I'm telling you I'm going to ban the opposition. That's what they're saying. So to say that could have some look, I don't want to compare everything. You can do it in your own minds, okay? Needless to say, all of this has been well monitored by the European Union, and they continue to say, you don't repeal this law, you can't join the European Union. And I imagine if they start going out and banning opposition parties, that's probably not going to speed up the European Union process either. Now, the opposition attacks them over this, saying you're derailing our European Union accession. You're derailing our membership of the European community, our membership of the European market, which would allow Georgians access to it. It could give them some economic benefit, and it could also help them not only with trade, but also with visa liberalization, allowing them to travel throughout Europe. It would help them in many ways, according to the pro-European camp, which, according to the government, is everyone. Why would they be passing laws like this while they're pro-EU if they want to join the European Union? Well, some would say, and this is of course speculation, that they don't really want to join the EU all that much. And in fact, they're maybe even worried that if they were to join the EU, the Russians could respond violently. Because remember, Euromaidan was not over NATO membership. Euromaidan was over further integration with the European Union, not even European Union membership, an association agreement under a pro-Russian president, Yanukovych. So if that's all it took for the Russians to invade and annex Crimea, and the Russians have already invaded and annexed 20% of the country, it could make sense from that perspective. Not saying it's the right perspective, I disagree with it, but of course, I'm a Yankoid. From that perspective, it might be the more stable decision to not do it. And by passing laws like this, not only does it give the government more authority, more control, and more authoritarian control of the civil society, but it also serves a double purpose of derailing EU accession. Now, whether that would later come with more integration with Russia, as again, the Dream Party is referred to as the pro-Russia party by the opposition, due to not only the passing of these laws, but their more cordial relationship with the Russians. And I mean, again, the Russians were the first one to, say that this election, outside of Viktor Orban, I believe, that this election was legitimate and congratulated them over this. Some people would say that they don't want to join the EU at all, and that this is a purposeful derailment. The Dream Party rejects this. If you see this flag behind them, you see those stars in it. I don't want to show you the Dream Party flag. It's not important. But those stars are around the Dream Party symbol. It's supposed to represent the European Union. They were getting attacked so much over this, for obvious reasons, that they turned their symbol into a semi-representation of the European Union just to try to hit home to voters that actually we still want to join the European Union. And our European Union membership is inevitable. And if you talk to different politicians about it, they'll say, yeah, we're still going to join the European Union. And if they're asked about the law, they'll just say, oh, you know, disagreements. Da, 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 da. But they still are campaigning on the idea that they want to join the EU. But to many people in Georgia, this election was a referendum on joining the European Union. Because if they keep the Russian agents law, if they start by banning opposition parties, and they keep going down on this path, the odds of them joining the European Union are only going to get slimmer, slimmer, and slimmer until it disappears in its entirety. So many in Georgia saw this as a referendum on the European Union. But now, many could also say that it might be a referendum on Georgian democracy, period, because of the rampant reports and footage of voter intimidation, of ballot stuffing, of vote buying, of political violence directed at opposition, directed at those who were sent to monitor the vote counting. I mean, it is blatant. It is blatant. And I look, I don't know where to start with this, and I don't know how to get the point across the best. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show footage of some of the stuff that was getting caught, and just you guys make up your own minds, and then we'll read a report from the people who were sent there to monitor the election, and we'll get the opinion of those who are maybe a little bit more involved than we are. What are you doing? Nothing. Did you just distribute money? What list do you have? These are food lists. Beso Anzer. Are these food lists? So for those of you who don't know, what she's holding is a list of people with money that is supposed to be, at least that's what the person is being, hey, look at this. Money for people who are voting to be paid for their vote. You vote, you get paid this money. It's the same accusation that was made towards the Russians at what they were doing in Moldova. And we watched some footage of a woman talking about the money that she was offered in order to vote for the opposition and vote against trying to join the European Union. Are these food lists? What are you doing? What are you doing? This is a criminal offense. Not great. Not great. But that's not, I mean, like, okay, how blatant do you want to get? Look at this man voting. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Who knows? I mean, you know, maybe that dude, you know, maybe he, you know, maybe he looks like one man, but he has the will and strength of 8. And therefore, in Georgia, he is allowed to vote 8 times. You know, you never know. You never know. And of course, the strategically placed blocking of the camera. I mean, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? Brilliant. I was unfamiliar with your game. Okay, now again, this is all still alleged because none of this has been 100% confirmed, but we'll read the OSCE report in a second. Let me just show you like a quick hypercut of this stuff because I'm only showing you a little bit. There's so much of this. Now, if you're confused about this video specifically, this guy is supposedly wiping off the ink that you use to like track the people who voted and stuff for the vote. The idea is that he's wiping the fact that he voted so he can go vote again. But we still don't know. Alleged. Now this is actually from a few years ago. This is not recent. Okay, it got through the election and then went into the symbol, yada, yada, yada. Okay. Now, a lot of this is accusation from the opposition. A lot of what is being recorded is opposition activists, and so people could talk about their political bias. Now, much of this was also recorded by election monitors, everyday people, even those not associated with the opposition. So let's start simple. Let's start with the experts. Let's start with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, these are the people sent to help monitor the election, document it, and then report on how it was done. When people talk about election monitors, making sure that, you know, all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted, these are the people they are referring to. I will say, before we watch this, remember that YouTuber MP from Cyprus who kind of got elected on accident a little bit, you know, from Cyprus? Well, that guy actually was one of the observers. He was sent by the European Union to be an observer in the Georgian elections. Now, I'll just play his recapping of the events because I just found it fascinating. I found it fascinating. I want to know what you guys think upon watching this video.
I'm here in Georgia, and today probably they have the biggest elections in the history of the country.
The European Union sent me and other 6 members of the European Parliament
To supervise the elections, to make sure that they are fair and they are not cheating.
I landed at my 5-star hotel paid by the European Parliament, and immediately we started attending briefings that the staff arranged to understand the political situation in Georgia and how the election process was going to be. Among the people that came to brief us was the Prime Minister, the opposition party leaders, and the owners of the media. In our free time, I was attending rallies and I was asking the few people in the streets that they spoke English more information to better shape my opinion. But also I did some sightseeing and enjoyed a bit the beautiful capital of Georgia. And finally, it was a big elections day. We woke up early in the morning and we started hitting the polling stations.
Here is the first voter of the day. Wow.
Then we drove to multiple polling stations and I was actually inspecting for my first time if the polling stations were doing a good job. Even though I saw some incidents that I didn't like, overall the day went smoothly and we stayed until late night in the polling station to inspect the counting as well.
Okay, I'm sorry, but that edit threw me for a loop the first time I saw it. I had my neck almost broke because of the way my neck was what? Because that just quick, like, you know, there was a few because look, listen to how he describes it.
Some incidents that I didn't like, overall the day.
Look, the day went smoothly over this man stuffing 8 ballots into a single box. Remember in 2020 when we saw so many of these schizophrenics, and apologies to the schizophrenic community. I keep getting emails from them. I'll think of a better word eventually. I saw so many of these knuckle draggers taking footage from security cams or from like phones, like stuck in through the window of like an election worker who's like 50, 60 years old, doing this because they love their country and there's, you know, no other reason than that. They're trying to do civic duty and they're going through counting all these votes and they put them in a box and slide them under the table. And then there'd be days and days and days and days and days and days of speculation to turn to weeks, to turn to months. And now since then, it's been years about why they slid the box under the table, why they do this, why they do that, why they do this. And then you dig into it and you find out, it's like, oh, this is completely within procedure. Now, I don't know with what procedure you're going to be stuffing ballots like this, right? This, in comparison, it's like, I don't know how to even compare it. It's the minor leagues and the major leagues, okay? The minor leagues and the major leagues. The day went smoothly over that threw me for a loop. That threw me for a loop.
The day went smoothly and we stayed until late night in the polling station to inspect the counting as well. The next day, our real work started. All of us, the 7 members of the European Parliament, we went together in a room and we worked on a text in which we explained our observation. And then we shared our statement in a press conference full of local and international media.
Okay, you guys can go read the EU statement, but I'm going to read the OSCE statement because I just am. You can go read it yourself, though, but there's no reason for me to read, like, the reports of the same thing multiple times over. Wait, this is Moldova. Oh, oopsie doopsie. No wonder I was saying Moldova earlier. I had the wrong thing up in advance. I am a fool. I am a fool. Forgive me. Georgia OSCE report. Here we go. This is the one I wanted. Sorry, this is the other election that the Russians have been accused of meddling in. Let's look at the new election that the Russians have been accused of meddling in. Georgia's elections marred by an uneven playing field, pressure and tension, but voters were offered a wide choice. International observers. Let's read. While voters were offered a choice between 18 candidate lists and candidates could generally campaign freely, Georgia's parliamentary elections were marred by entrenched polarization and concerns over recently adopted legislation and its impact on fundamental freedoms in civil society, as well as highly diverse campaign rhetoric and widespread reports of pressure on voters, international observers said in a statement today. Now, mind you, this is released like right after the fact, so they have not had much time to do investigation. Keep that in mind when we're looking at this. So a lot of this is going to be reports this. The Joint Observation Mission from the OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and the European Parliament noted deepening political divides, as well as the significant imbalance in financial resources and the many advantages taken by the ruling party contributed to an already uneven playing field. In the run-up to the elections, numerous civil society organizations reported on the stigmatization impacts of the law on transparency and foreign influence, together with incidents of attack and intimidation. This, along with potential sanctions for not complying with the law, has also impacted their ability to carry out work free from undue pressure. Imbalances in financial resources, a divisive campaign atmosphere, and recent legislation amendments were a significant concern throughout this election process. Yet the engagement shown on election day, from the active voter participation, robust presence of its citizens and party observers, and rich diversity of voices, gives the sign of a system that is still growing and evolving with a democratic vitality under construction. Mind you, voter turnout in this Georgian election went up. It went up compared to previous elections. Observers found the legal framework to be adequate for holding democratic elections. However, some previous positive changes were reversed by recent amendments, and several long-standing recommendations remain unaddressed. While the earlier amendments were adopted following inclusive public dialogues, frequent revisions, including a number made shortly before the election and without broad cross-party support, undermined its stability and raised concerns about the potential for misusing the changes to gain political benefit. At the same time, the effectiveness of campaign finance oversight was undermined by limited enforcement and concerns over the impartiality and political instrumentalization of the oversight body. I know there's a lot of political language, but we're going to get through this because it's important. These elections were marked by high polarization of the political and media landscape, hate speech against the opposition and civil society, and antagonism towards the office of the president, said Bulai, head of the PACE delegation. The quality of the elections reflected the pre-electoral period, given the cases of vote buying, widespread climate of pressure and party-organized intimidation before and during the elections, especially in rural areas. Now, let me say something about these rural areas. If you look into Tbilisi, the ruling party got crushed by the opposition. They got crushed by the united opposition. And this is the thing that scares the ruling party, is what makes this election different from the other elections is since all the other parties, like 15, 20%, they never really had much of a concern. But this time, most of the opposition united into one block, saying that they would rule together, even though many of them have different ideologies and such, just to make sure the Dream Party is out so they can try to reestablish some sort of fairness in the system and to bring them back on the path of European Union integration, because all of the opposition is basically pro-EU, because basically all of Georgia is pro-EU. Oh, but the rural areas, in Tbilisi, the ruling party was crushed. In the rural areas, they would get 85 to 90% of the vote. Now, is that impossible? No. But when most of the reports are coming from these rural areas, when you're getting some weird videos, when you're hearing about a lot of vote buying out there, and you're seeing these spikes where there's less observers, where there's less people to document this type of stuff, it causes concern to see those disparities, those differences. That doesn't mean that's impossible. It just means you need to do some digging here, because I would not trust the Dream Party to be, let's just say, transparent about their electoral strategy in rural Georgia. Questions about the impartiality of state institutions. We express our concerns about the electoral conditions, in particular, the uneven playing field, which undermines trust in the outcome and explains the reaction to the election results. These issues need to be addressed by the authorities. While we commend the largely peaceful election, some of this is, I said we were going to read all of it. I don't know how much we're going to get into all. You know what? Let's go through all of it quickly. While we commend the largely peaceful election, the decline in female candidates due to the removal of gender quotas is a setback for diversity. This isn't necessarily, I think, institutional for democracy. There are legitimate disagreements to have with this, especially as women's active participation at polling stations highlights their vital role in demand for greater representation. With the recent adaptation of the law on transparency of foreign influence, I hope its implications for freedom of association and expression will be reevaluated in the next parliament to protect civil society's vital work in Georgia and ensure all voices are heard. The election administration organized the elections efficiently, but the public perception of its impartiality was harmed by concerns about the recent changes of its nomination and decision-making processes.
Hey, off topic, but I have been disheartened over some leftist support of groups that have been religious persecution of Baha'is in the Middle East. Any chance you can speak on that? If not, I understand.
Give me specific instances on my email, DylanBurnsLIVE@gmail.com, and I will probably be better able to respond to it because, like, it would depend on the specific group, it would depend on what the person said, it would depend on a bunch of different stuff. But I don't want to not respond, I just want to, follow up later. Let's see. I said we were going to read the whole thing, but I think we got the point mostly here, and I don't want to waste too much time because I do need to head out east tomorrow, and I'm going to make sure we get sleep. Let me just read the end here. The International Election Observant mission to the parliamentary election in Georgia totaled, here it is. While the campaign offered voters a wide choice in the run-up to Georgia's parliamentary elections, which was good to see, that is not enough to bring an election in line with international democratic principles, said Murphy, who headed the ODIRHR Election Observer Mission. The deep polarization in the country, the undue pressure on voters and civil society, and the tension that we saw on Election Day demonstrates that much work is still needed. Okay, so after this, after all these videos came out, after all the reports from rural areas where the Dream Party performed the best, of voter intimidation, a lot of vote buying, videos of alleged vote buying, all this stuff comes out, and then the Georgian president rejects the election results, which was definitely a big way to put a flag on the issue and wave it on the international stage. This is what she said about it, by the way. We do not recognize, quote unquote, Russian elections. Let me read you the quote. All methods we have seen used in other countries were applied here. Additionally, modern technologies to whitewash falsification was deployed. This was the first, I don't know if it was the first time in Georgia, but it's more modern example in Georgia. They didn't used to do this, of them using widespread electronic voting. I think it's like 90% of the votes were done electronically, or if not 90%, a very large portion. We have never seen anything like this. We are the witnesses and victims of a Russian special operation, a hybrid war waged against our own people and our own country. The president further referred to the elections as Russian elections and accused the government of depriving citizens of constitutional rights. They took away our electoral institution because after these elections, it is hard to imagine what future elections will look like unless something changes. They have stripped us of our constitutional right to choice. I do not recognize these elections. Recognizing them would be akin to recognizing Russian dominance over Georgia. I do not come to this country for that, and our ancestors didn't live for that. We will not accept this. No one will take away Georgia's European future. After the president made this statement, after the opposition came out in a huge uproar in rejection of the results, because I don't know if you guys actually were watching the results like I was, but for the first few hours, as the exit polling came out, people were very, very hopeful. And I tried my best to tamper down this hopefulness. I think it was Kraut, the YouTuber, who tweeted out about it. And one second, let me see if I can find the Kraut tweet that I responded to give you an idea of what the results were. Yeah, here it is. This is from October 26th. This is from 2 days ago. Despite all the intimidation, lies, fraud, and violence, Russia lost and Georgia won. And from this image, you can see that this exit poll has the opposition at 51.9, that's a united opposition, and the Georgia Dream Party at 40.9. That's an over a 10-point loss. And this isn't the only exit poll that had it like this. There were opposition exit polls that had it like this. There were other independent exit polls that had it like this. But the Dream Party exit polls didn't have it like this. And so I was quick to try to tamper it down. Don't think we're out of the woods yet. Pro-Dream Party exit polls have a different result, and the prolific violence surrounding today's election suggests to me that the power might not so easily be given up. The ruling party was moving to ban opposition parties after all, and then we got the opposition party polling, and then we got these results, which started to show differences between the opposition exit polling and the other exit polling. So after all these irregularities, after all these problems, the United States and the European Union has called for a deeper investigation. And none of them have recognized the results of the election, and I do not expect them in the near future to recognize the result of the election. Now, that does not mean that nobody in the European Union is going to, respect the results of the election, because guess who was in Tbilisi today? Orban. He arrived in Georgia today in order to hail the ruling party's quote-unquote overwhelming victory. The same person, Viktor Orban, who got a vice grip over Hungary's media institutions, the same person who has let the Georgian state and EU funds became the personal biggie bank of his cronies and his friends, leading Hungary to be one of the countries with the most public sector corruption, if not the most public sector corruption in all of the European Union. This man, who is openly rooting for Donald Trump to win, interfering, going into American elections, coming up and rah-rah-rahing, trying to get him over the top so he can have more leverage in Europe and so he can cut off aid to Ukraine. This man is the first one to go over to Tbilisi, do a little dance and say, yay for the ruling party. He didn't wait for an investigation. He didn't wait to see the concerns of the opposition. He didn't wait for any deeper digging into this. Like, oh, let's go look into these videos of a guy stuffing 8 ballots into one box. He didn't do any of that. He simply accepted the result, called it an overwhelming victory, and then not only did he do that, he went there to celebrate with the party that is being accused of all these things. Anyway, there are protests. There are people on the street. There are thousands on the street. The Georgian president is on the street as well. By the way, there's a president and prime minister. The president is mostly symbolic. The prime minister has much more of the power. If you're curious as to why the president is against it, but the prime minister is, the ruling party. You get the idea. Okay. What else do I have to say about this? Look, if it is found that this election was stolen, and as much as people have talked about elections being stolen, as much as people say stuff because they're coping and they're seething and they can't deal with the loss, if this election was stolen and these instances of vote rigging, of vote buying, of voter intimidation, and connections to direct violence towards the opposition, if this could be dug up and found to have been done by the Dream Party to manipulate the results of the election, especially in rural areas, which is one of the big accusations right now, if that is found and that is not stopped, then what happened is the Georgian Dream Party stole an election and Georgian democracy is bleeding out on the sidewalk. These are the moments where if this comes to pass, that we find out that is what happened, and much evidence does point to that, then there is no other option if you want Georgian democracy to be upheld, to do everything within your power to stop the Dream Party from holding on to power. That means protesting, that means striking, that means doing everything you can to shut down the system. Now, obviously, I'm not Georgian. I can't tell the Georgians what to do with their time. I cannot tell them to go onto the street and face water cannons and pepper spray for their country. They have to make that decision for themselves. I think many people have learned from the last few years that you cannot wait on the big bad West or the big bad whoever to come in and save you, or to come in and save your democracy and stand on principle, stand 10 toes down on business, on democracy, standing on principle. We saw that happen. And what happened in 2014? Very little reaction. In 2022, it took months before there was substantive reaction when it comes to aid, even if there was warning and aid in advance, because people thought the country would collapse. And I think many might be of the opinion, quite frankly, that the Georgian Dream Party is likely to stay in power. They control the institutions. They have already an overwhelming majority. They've been willing to use violence before. They'll probably be willing to use it again. And they would probably willing to send the police out there to rough out people too if it got bad. And so they could be hedging their bets, saying, look, on one hand, they could go balls to the wall, go in there, support the protesters, say, we do not recognize this illegitimate government, yada, yada, yada. But if the government's still there at the end of the day, then you might still have to do business with it. At least that's the perspective of the Western capital. And if that's the perspective of the Western capital, if that's the perspective of the politician, then that is not what's going to bring about the Dream Party going down. I'm not saying that they can't completely disregard the election results or say it was stolen. They can't have any effect. I'm sure if all of the European Union says you stole the election, you're never going to join the European Union, you're never going to join the European Union, we're stealing elections, you're doing this, doing that, that could have an effect on the Georgian population. That could maybe spur them into action. That could add pressure on the Georgian government. But at the end of the day, it is the Georgian people who will ultimately decide the future of the country if they go out on the street and join the protests, if they make the Dream Party, open up, be transparent, either have another election if it is found that it is to be stolen, or find some way to move forward and make it so that we don't have all this violence around every election. You don't have all this cases of voter intimidation. You don't have all these cases of alleged vote stuffing or vote rigging or vote buying. And instead, you have an up and down vote for the Georgian people on them deciding the future of their country instead of fear-mongering about your country becoming demolished like Bakhmut if you decide to join the European path that by supporting the opposition while also saying that you're going to join the European path yourself. Either way, this is a make or break moment for the opposition. This is a make or break moment for Georgian democracy. And this is a make or break moment for the European Union's relationship with Georgia. Okay, so let's get into the news.